Now that everything is dry, I'm going to come in first with transparent yellow and start filling in some of these white spaces. Now remember, these white spaces in the foliage is where the paper never got wet. That was kind of the trick of the spraying, is to spray just enough to fuse shapes together but not saturate them. I wanted these white shapes because these white shapes are very wild looking, very erratic, and I think it works really well for this sort of scene. When I put this transparent yellow in, you can see I'm not being all that careful. It catches some of the edge and bleeds some of the colors surrounding the shape out. And that's okay, because then I get a variety of yellow. You know, I get red mixed with the yellow, I get green and blue mixed with the yellow. And I think that works out. But still, when I apply these colors, they're light enough in value where you can still see the shape. I want to maintain these erratic shapes that I created with this process. I'll switch over to other colors for these shapes, but I do use yellow predominantly. And then I'll, of course, use some cerulean blue and some rose for some of the other flower colors. Once I've got those in, I'm going to take my palette knife in vertical motions. I'm going to scrape the salt off somewhat carefully. I don't want to bear down too much and scratch the paper. Now I'm going to come in with yellow ochre, which is relatively opaque, and put some little details on some of the yellow, because this will give the impression that these yellow shapes have dimension, some depth. Another finishing detail is pulling grass blades in with my palette knife. I dip the palette knife into a pool of paint, relatively rich paint, much like a pen quill into ink, and then pull the blades up. I also use the palette knife sometimes to pull snags of trees. I think that's the term, the dead trunks of trees that were. Here I'll use a rigger to pull another tree in. I'll sometimes take an X-Acto knife and expose areas of trunk in the pull and smash trees, just to give the viewer the impression that, yeah, there's tree trunks exposed in some areas. It just gives the trees a little more depth, and I think it gives them a little bit more credibility. Now I'm going to apply some brown matter into these scraped areas. I come in and dab it right away with the tissue so that anything that's spilled over the white shape is lifted right away. And also with the X-Acto knife, I'll pull flower shapes. In this case, this will be a beargrass plant. I'll scrape the stem with the X-Acto knife, and then I'll carve the kind of Q-tip like flower area with a single-edged razor blade. I'll end up putting a number of these in the painting. I've got to get back to the white of the paper, and then I'll soften the Q-tip portion of the beargrass with a scrubber. While they're still wet, I'll add some shade details. I tipped it on its side because I want the shade to bleed up just a little bit, giving it kind of a roundish shading effect. Now here again with the palette knife, I'll pull in some of the stems on these. Now with my smallest flat brush, I'm going to suggest that there's some little trees in the distance on these mid-ground hills. These are kind of crude shapes, but I think in the aggregate they'll suggest that there's just some distant clumps of trees. And I'll add a little bit of shading with cobalt blue to give the hill a little bit more dimension. And I'll also come along the shoreline with some burnt sienna to signify the rocky area where the hills meet the lake. And when that is dry, I'll come in with some cobalt blue and I'll create some shading in those. Another finishing detail when these paints on the shoreline are dry would be to scrape with the edge of a single-edged razor blade the intersection between the land and the water. Then another finishing detail would be to go up into the sky with a scrubber and pull some of the light areas of the sky down over the mountain. A little wisp of cloud or fog. This should be done carefully because it's not really reversible. I'll tend to scrub a little bit with a water-soaked scrubbing brush and then lift with the tissue. And that's about it for this watercolor mountain lake.